They said no woman would ever look twice at a man who carried the desert in his scars and the silence of a tomb in his gaze, let alone a woman as vibrant as she was. When her ex-husband Rick cornered her at the gala, laughing at the broken man standing by her side, he thought he had won the ultimate game of humiliation. But as the music died, and the most powerful men in the room began to bow, the terrifying secret of who she had actually married started to unravel, turning a night of mockery into a reckoning they would never forget. The air in the grand ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the underlying sting of betrayal. Stella felt the weight of every diamond on her neck, but they felt like lead. Beside her stood Arthur, a man who moved with a heavy, deliberate gait that suggested a body put back together by sheer force of will. His face was a map of harsh lines, a jagged silver scar tracing from his temple to his jaw, marring what might have once been conventional beauty. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply stood there like a monolith of dark granite amidst a sea of fluttering silk and golden champagne. Stella kept her hand firmly tucked into the crook of his arm, her fingers brushing the rough wool of his charcoal suit. She could feel the stares. They were like tiny needles pricking at her skin. To the elite of the city, she was the fallen princess, the woman who had been discarded by the golden boy of the tech industry, Rick Vane. And to see her now, 3 years after a scandalous divorce that left her penniless, clinging to a man who looked like he belonged in a back-alley brawl rather than a black tie event, was the entertainment they had all been cravenly domesticating. Rick appeared from the crowd like a shark through water, his smile blindingly white and entirely hollow. He had a glass of vintage scotch in one hand, and his new trophy wife, a girl barely out of her 20s, draped over his other arm. He stopped directly in front of Stella and Arthur, his eyes raking over Arthur's scarred face with a cruel, unchecked mirth. "Stella, darling, I heard you had fallen on hard times, but I didn't realize you had resorted to charity work," Rick said, his voice carrying just enough to ensure the surrounding tables fell silent. "Tell me, does he speak, or did the accident that ruined his face take his tongue as well? I'm worried for you. If you needed a bodyguard, you could have just asked for a recommendation. You didn't have to marry the help." Stella felt Arthur's bicep tighten under her touch. It was the only sign that he had heard the insult. He didn't look at Rick. He looked straight ahead, his dark, shadowed eyes fixed on something far beyond the walls of the room. The silence stretched, becoming agonizing. Stella felt the familiar heat of shame rising in her throat, the same shame Rick had used to crush her for years. But then, she remembered the way Arthur had looked at her when he found her working 3 jobs just to pay her mother's medical bills. She remembered the way he had stepped out of the shadows of the old library, offering not just a marriage of convenience, but a shield. "He is my husband, Rick," Stella said, her voice steady and clear, echoing in the quiet space. "And he has more honor in his silence than you have in every word you've ever spoken." Rick laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Honor? Is that what we're calling it now? Look at him, Stella. He's a monster. He looks like something that crawled out of a nightmare. People are whispering. They're wondering if you finally lost your mind. Or maybe you just like the way he scares people. It's pathetic. You went from the king of this city to this." Arthur finally turned his head. It was a slow, predatory movement. When his eyes met Rick's, the younger man's smirk flickered for a fraction of a second. There was something in Arthur's gaze that wasn't just anger. It was an ancient, cold authority. It was the look of a man who had seen the end of the world and wasn't impressed by a suit that cost more than a teacher's yearly salary. "You should be careful with your investments, Mr. Vane," Arthur said. His voice was a deep, gravelly rasp that seemed to vibrate in the very floorboards. "Pride is a volatile asset. It crashes without warning." Rick sneered, recovering his bravado. "Asset? Listen to him trying to use big words. Stick to whatever dark hole you crawled out of, buddy. This is my world. I own this room. I own the people in it. And Stella? She's just a reminder of a bad debt I settled a long time ago." He leaned in closer, dropping his voice so only the three of them could hear. "I'm going to make sure no one in this town ever hires her, talks to her, or looks at her again. And as for you, I'll have your history on my desk by morning. I'll find out which prison you escaped from, and I'll send you back myself." Arthur didn't flinch. A small, almost imperceptible tilt of his lips was the only response. It wasn't a smile. It was the baring of teeth. Stella pulled Arthur away, not out of fear for him, but because she could feel the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. They walked toward the terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief from the suffocating arrogance of the ballroom. She looked at him, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight, and for a moment, she didn't see the scars. She saw the man who had sat with her in silence for hours when her grief was too heavy to carry. "I'm sorry, Arthur," she whispered. "I shouldn't have brought you here. I wanted to prove I was okay, but I only gave him a target." Arthur looked out over the city lights, his profile stark and formidable. "He doesn't matter, Stella. Let him enjoy his stage while the curtains are still open. But he's powerful, Arthur. He can do what he said. He can ruin what little I have left." Arthur turned to her, his large, calloused hand reaching out to gently cup her face. His touch was incredibly light, a startling contrast to his rugged appearance. He looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her heart skip. "He thinks he knows who I am because he sees a broken face," Arthur said quietly. "He thinks power is a name in a newspaper or a balance in a bank. He is about to learn that true power is the things people don't see coming until it's too late. Trust me, Stella. Stay by my side tonight. Don't let go of my arm." Before she could ask what he meant, the heavy brass doors to the terrace swung open. A man in a military-grade suit, looking frantic, scanned the area until his eyes landed on them. He didn't head for Rick. He ran straight toward Arthur, stopping 3 feet away and bowing his head in a gesture of profound respect that made Stella's breath hitch. "Sir, the board has arrived," the man whispered, though the urgency was clear. "They've heard about the disruption. They're waiting for your signal to begin the acquisition." Arthur's gaze went cold. "Tell them to wait. I want Mr. Vane to finish his champagne first. I want him to feel like a king for 5 more minutes." Stella looked from the messenger to her husband, her mind racing. The acquisition? Rick had been bragging for months about a secret merger that would make him the wealthiest man in the state. He had bet everything on it. His company, his reputation, his soul. "Arthur, who are you?" Stella breathed, her voice trembling. Arthur looked back at the ballroom, where Rick was currently holding court, unaware that the floor was about to vanish beneath his feet. "I'm the man they never invited to the party, Stella. And tonight, I'm the man who's buying the building." The heavy brass doors of the terrace closed behind the messenger, leaving Stella alone with a man she suddenly realized she did not know at all. The air between them was practically humming with unspent electricity. Arthur did not look at her. He kept his gaze fixed on the sprawling city below, his broad shoulders rising and falling with a slow, controlled breath. The revelation hung in the cold night air, a phantom that shifted the very ground beneath Stella's feet. He was buying the building. He was the architect of Rick's impending doom. But as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, a different kind of tension took its place. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of Arthur's isolation. "Let us go," Arthur said, his voice stripped of the dangerous authority he had wielded moments ago. It was hollow now, laced with an exhaustion that seemed to seep from his bones. "We have given them enough entertainment for one evening." He did not offer his arm this time. He walked past her, keeping a deliberate distance, his limp slightly more pronounced. Stella followed him through the labyrinth of the hotel corridors, avoiding the main ballroom. They emerged into the stark, fluorescent glare of the valet station. The change in atmosphere was immediate and violent. Away from the dim romantic lighting of the gala, Arthur's scars were thrown into sharp relief. The valet, a young kid barely out of his teens, physically recoiled when Arthur handed him the ticket. The boy's hands shook, his eyes darting away in primitive fear. It was a reaction Stella had seen a dozen times since they married, but tonight she saw how it made Arthur's jaw clench, how he pulled his collar up as if to hide the ruin of his face from the world. When the sleek black car arrived, its tinted windows and reinforced steel frame looking more like a military transport than a luxury sedan, Arthur opened the door for her, but did not follow her in immediately. He stood in the harsh light, a solitary figure draped in shadows. When he finally slid into the back seat, he pressed himself as far into the opposite corner as the spacious cabin allowed. The privacy partition was already raised, sealing them in a quiet, leather-scented cocoon. "You should not have spoken to him like that," Arthur said into the darkness as the car pulled away from the curb. His tone was harsh, a sudden defensive wall slamming down between them. "You should have walked away. You should have let him think whatever he wanted." Stella turned to him, her heart pounding against her ribs. Let him think what? That I am a victim? That I am married to a monster just like he said? I am not afraid of Rick anymore, Arthur. And I am certainly not ashamed of you. "You should be," he snapped, the words lashing out like a whip. He turned his face toward the window, watching the blur of streetlights. "You heard the whispers in that room, Stella. You saw the way that boy looked at me just now. I am a ghost, a nightmare people use to scare their children. This arrangement, this marriage, was supposed to be a shield for you. I provided the funds to save your mother, to clear your debts, and in return, you gave me a quiet companion in my empty house. That was the deal. You are not supposed to defend me. You are not supposed to tether your reputation to a man whose face makes people cross the street." The cruelty in his words was entirely self-directed. Stella could hear the raw, bleeding shame beneath his anger. He was terrified. Not of Rick, not of the board members, but of her. He was terrified that she would look at him the way the rest of the world did, with pity and revulsion. "Stop it," Stella commanded, her voice surprisingly steady. She closed the physical distance between them, sliding across the smooth leather seat until her knee brushed his. He stiffened, every muscle in his massive frame going rigid, bracing for a blow or a retreat. She did neither. She reached out in the dark, her fingers finding his clenched fist resting on his thigh. "You think you can scare me away because your face is scarred?" Stella asked, her thumb gently tracing the prominent knuckles of his hand. Rick had a perfect face. Rick was the cover of magazines, and he was the most terrifying, abusive monster I have ever known. He destroyed my spirit behind closed doors while smiling for the cameras. You stepped into my life when I was drowning. You paid off the hospital, you gave me a safe place to sleep, and you never once asked for anything in return. You sit in the dark because you think you belong there, but you are the only light I have seen in 3 years. Arthur exhaled, a long, ragged sound that seemed to tear at his throat. He did not pull his hand away, but he did not hold hers in return. He stared down at her small, delicate fingers resting against his scarred skin, the contrast almost painful to witness. "You do not understand the world I operate in, Stella." He kept his voice perilously low. "The people I deal with, the money I control. It is built in the shadows for a reason. I am not just a wealthy recluse. The acquisition tonight is a fraction of what I manage. If the people I destroy learn that I have a weakness, if they learn that I actually care about the woman wearing my ring, they will not mock you at a gala. They will hunt you. I pushed you away tonight because it is the only way I know how to keep you alive." Stella absorbed the gravity of his confession. The pieces began to click into place. The men in military suits bowing to him, the encrypted phones ringing at all hours, the absolute fortress they lived in. He wasn't just rich. He was a phantom king of an unseen empire. and he had laid his entire empire on the line just to buy the very ground Rick stood upon, purely to avenge her honor. "Then we fight them in the shadows," Stella said fiercely, leaning closer until she could smell the rain and cedar scent of his cologne. "I am not a fragile porcelain doll, Arthur. I survived Rick Vane. I can survive whatever monsters you are hiding from. But do not insult me by pretending you do not care. And do not ever tell me to let another man humiliate my husband." For a long moment, the only sound in the car was the hum of the engine and the harsh, uneven rhythm of Arthur's breathing. Slowly, with an agonizing hesitation, he turned his hand over. His large, calloused fingers closed around hers, enveloping her hand in a grip that was shockingly gentle. It was a silent surrender, an admission that the fortress he had built around his heart was finally cracking open. He did not say another word for the rest of the drive, but as the iron gates of his estate loomed out of the darkness, Stella knew the rules of their arrangement had irrevocably changed. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the heavy velvet drapes of the master suite, casting long, muted shadows across the room. Stella did not sleep. The events of the gala replayed in her mind like a broken film reel. The look of utter devastation on Rick's face when the board announced the hostile takeover, and the terrifying, silent power radiating from the man she called her husband. When she finally abandoned the massive empty bed and descended the sweeping marble staircase of Arthur's fortress-like estate, the house was eerily quiet. She found him in the West Wing, in a room she had never been allowed to enter before. The heavy oak doors were left slightly ajar. Stella pushed them open to reveal a sprawling command center. Banks of monitors glowed with scrolling financial data, international news feeds, and security footage of the estate's perimeter. Arthur stood before the screens, his broad back to her, dressed in a simple black shirt that stretched tightly across his shoulders. He was leaning heavily on his cane, the pronounced limp a stark reminder of the trauma that had shattered his body. Marcus, the security chief from the gala, was speaking in rapid, hushed tones. "He is not going quietly, sir," Marcus was saying, handing Arthur a tablet. "Rick Vane is utilizing every media contact he has left. He is spinning a narrative that his ex-wife conspired with a dangerous, disfigured criminal to sabotage a legitimate business deal. He is calling you a mob boss, a monster hiding in the hills. The tabloids are already picking it up. But that is not the worst part. The noise he is making is acting like a beacon. Our monitors are picking up inquiries from the Chicago Syndicate and the overseas shell companies. They know you are the one who moved on Vane, and more importantly, they now know you have a wife. They are looking for a vulnerability." Arthur's grip on the edge of the mahogany desk turned his knuckles stark white. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Shut down the network," he ordered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Liquidate the tertiary accounts and reroute the security detail to the perimeter. I want a transport ready in 10 minutes. Stella is leaving for the safe house in Geneva. She will not be dragged into this filth." "No, she will not," Stella said, stepping fully into the room. Both men turned. Arthur's scarred face tightened, a mixture of anger and deep, primal fear flashing in his dark eyes. He closed the distance between them with surprising speed, despite his heavy leg, towering over her. "You should not be in here, Stella. Go upstairs and pack whatever you can fit in a single bag. Marcus will escort you to the airfield." Stella stood her ground, tilting her chin up to meet his furious gaze. "I am not running away, Arthur. And I am certainly not letting Rick Vane chase me out of my own country. You told me last night that true power is what people do not see coming. Sending me away is exactly what Rick expects you to do. He wants to isolate you. He wants to prove that you are the monster he claims you are, incapable of living in the light." "You do not understand the stakes," Arthur roared, the sudden volume of his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He caught himself, his chest heaving, and lowered his voice to a desperate rasp. "This is not a gala anymore, Stella. These are not people who fight with snide remarks over champagne. If the people I took this empire from realize that you are the one thing I care about, they will not write a tabloid article. They will take you. They will use you to tear me apart piece by piece. My face is a testament to what happens when you underestimate them. I will not let them touch you." Stella did not flinch. She reached out, just as she had in the car, and placed her hand flat against his chest, right over his violently beating heart. "You are underestimating me, Arthur. I was married to Rick for 5 years. I know how his public relations machine works. I know the names of the journalists he bribes, the offshore accounts he uses to hide his hush money, and the exact vulnerabilities in his social armor. He thinks I am a silent victim. He thinks you are a brute. Let him keep thinking that." Arthur stared down at her, the frantic energy slowly draining from his posture, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. He looked at her hand on his chest, then back to her eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting we do not hide," Stella said, her voice dropping to a cool, strategic whisper. "If we run, we look guilty. If we stay in the shadows, Rick controls the narrative. I want you to use that massive, terrifying network of yours to freeze his remaining assets, but I will handle the media. I know exactly which reporter has been trying to expose Rick's embezzlement for years. We give her the financial records from the acquisition. We show the world that Rick Vane was bankrupting his own investors, and that the mysterious buyer was the only thing that saved the city's pension fund." Marcus, standing silently by the monitors, let out a low whistle of appreciation. "She has a point, sir. Vane's narrative only works if we remain the faceless villains. If we expose his fraud, his smear campaign against you looks like the desperate flailing of a ruined man." Arthur did not look at Marcus. His eyes were locked on Stella, searching her face for any sign of hesitation, any tremor of the fear she had carried for 3 years. He found none. He saw only a fierce, unyielding intellect, and a woman who was finally claiming her own power. Slowly, the rigid tension in his jaw softened. The terrifying phantom of the financial underworld looked, for the first time, like a man who had finally found an equal. "You are willing to step into the crossfire for me?" Arthur asked, his voice thick with an emotion he seemed entirely unaccustomed to expressing. "After everything you have been through, you would willingly make yourself a target to protect a man who looks like this?" Stella let her hand slide up from his chest, her fingers gently brushing the edge of the jagged silver scar that ruined the left side of his face. He instinctively tried to pull away, a lifetime of shame dictating his movements, but she held firm. Her touch was achingly tender, mapping the contours of his pain. "I am not protecting a monster, Arthur," she whispered, the quiet truth of her words filling the expansive room. "I am protecting my husband. Now show me how to use those monitors. We have a monster of our own to slay." The command center became their sanctuary over the next 48 hours. The sprawling screens that usually displayed cold, ruthless market fluctuations were now filled with the labyrinth of Rick Vane's corporate deceit. Stella sat beside Arthur, her stockinged feet tucked beneath her on the leather chair, poring over encrypted ledgers while he stood at the main console. A silent, imposing guardian. The sterile chill of the room had melted into something profoundly intimate. In the quiet hours of the early morning, surrounded by the glow of monitors, the terrifying phantom of the financial underworld proved to be a man of agonizing gentleness. He ordered her favorite tea without asking, draped his heavy cashmere coat over her shoulders when she shivered, and listened to her strategic insights with a respect she had never experienced in her life. For the first time, Stella felt the crushing weight of her past beginning to lift. They were a unified front, preparing to deliver the final crushing blow to the man who had tormented her. But they had underestimated the sheer, venomous desperation of a narcissist backed into a corner. It happened on the third night, just hours before they were scheduled to leak the conclusive financial documents to the press. Marcus burst through the heavy oak doors, his usual stoic composure shattered. He did not speak. He simply grabbed the remote and unmuted the central monitor, which was tuned to a primetime national broadcast, Rick Vane filled the screen. He was not wearing his usual arrogant smirk. He looked disheveled, hollow-eyed, playing the role of the tragic, desperate hero to absolute perfection. He was sitting across from a notorious investigative journalist, holding a sheaf of papers that made Stella's blood run instantly cold. "I am not here to protect my reputation anymore," Rick said to the camera, his voice cracking with rehearsed emotion. "I am here because I fear for the life of my ex-wife, Stella. She is not the mastermind behind this hostile takeover. She is a hostage. The man she married, Arthur, is not a legitimate businessman. He is a predator who preys on vulnerable women, using his vast illicit wealth to trap them. He forced her to sign these documents, implicating her in the embezzlement of my company's pension funds. If he goes down, he has arranged it so she will take the fall. I am begging the authorities to intervene before this monster destroys her completely." The broadcast cut to a zoomed-in image of the documents Rick was holding. Stella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It was her signature, flawlessly forged on dozens of offshore transfer authorizations. "He backdated them to our marriage," Stella whispered, the room spinning violently around her. "He used the legal documents I signed during our divorce. He transposed my signature. If the federal investigators look at this, they will not see a victim. They will see an accomplice. He is going to send me to federal prison." Arthur stood paralyzed, his dark eyes fixed on the screen, as the news anchor began detailing the impending federal investigation into Stella's finances. The syndicate was one thing. He could fight ghosts in the shadows with his own army. But the federal government, armed with expertly forged documents and a public hungry for a scandal, was an unstoppable machine. If Stella was tethered to him when the authorities raided the estate, she would be dragged down into the abyss. Marcus turned to Arthur, his voice grim. "The perimeter alarms are silent, sir, but we have intercepted chatter on the federal bands. They are securing warrants. We have less than 3 hours before they breach the gates. If they find her here, with you, the optics will solidify Vane's narrative." Stella stood up, her hands trembling, but her voice remarkably steady. "We can prove they are forged, Arthur. We have the real ledgers. We can fight this in court. We just need to accelerate our timeline and give the real documents to the press right now." Arthur did not answer her. He stared at the floor, his broad chest rising and falling in sharp, jagged breaths. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until the air in the room felt toxic. When he finally looked up, the terrifying cold authority that had cowed the board members at the gala had returned. The gentle, wounded man she had spent the last 2 days with was gone, replaced by the ruthless phantom Rick had warned the world about. "Pack your bags, Stella," Arthur commanded. His voice was completely devoid of emotion, a flat, dead sound that struck her harder than a physical blow. "You are leaving. Now." Stella froze. "Arthur, no. We are a team. We promised we would fight this together. I am not running from him again." "You are not a partner, Stella," he said, turning fully toward her, his scarred face twisted into a mask of cruel indifference. "You were a convenient arrangement, a way for me to maintain a facade of normalcy. But you have become a liability I can no longer afford. Did you really think I would risk my entire empire, my freedom, for a woman I bought out of bankruptcy? Rick is a fool, but he was right about one thing. You are out of your depth. I manipulated those accounts, and I will not let your amateur attempts at public relations ruin my exit strategy." The words tore through her chest, shredding the fragile trust they had built. She stared at him, searching his dark eyes for any sign of the man who had gently covered her with his coat just hours ago. But his eyes were like black glass, impenetrable and hard. "You are lying," Stella breathed, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "You are trying to scare me away to protect me. You think you have to do this alone." "Marcus!" Arthur barked, ignoring her entirely. "Escort her to the airfield. The helicopter is waiting. Take her to the Geneva property and confiscate her phone. She is no longer permitted to contact anyone in this country. If she resists, use force. I want her out of my house." "Arthur, please!" Stella cried out as Marcus stepped forward, gently but firmly grasping her arm. "Do not do this. Do not let him win by turning you back into the monster he wants you to be." Arthur turned his back to her, facing the blank monitors. "The arrangement is terminated, Stella. Do not ever return to this city." Marcus pulled her toward the door. Stella fought against his grip, sobbing Arthur's name, the sound of her devastation echoing off the high ceilings. But the scarred man did not turn around. He stood as rigid as a statue, letting the heavy oak doors slam shut behind her, sealing him in his solitary tomb. The ride to the helipad was a blur of blinding tears and suffocating betrayal. Stella sat in the back of the armored SUV, her heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She had finally trusted a man, only to be thrown to the wolves the moment the stakes became real. But as the helicopter blades began to spin, creating a deafening roar in the cold night air, Marcus opened the door to assist her inside. He leaned in close, checking her seatbelt, and before pulling away, he slipped a thick, sealed manila envelope into the deep pocket of her coat. "Do not open it until you are in the air," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with a fierce, suppressed emotion. "And remember, ma'am, he is the most powerful man in the city, but he has never known how to save himself, only how to burn for the people he loves." The helicopter lifted off, leaving the dark, sprawling estate behind. Stella pulled the envelope from her pocket, her hands shaking violently as she tore the seal. Inside was a signed confession, completely exonerating her, and a legally binding transfer of Arthur's entire legitimate fortune into her name. He had not betrayed her. He had just signed his own death warrant to guarantee her absolute freedom. The deafening thrum of the helicopter blades mirrored the violent pounding of Stella's heart. She stared at the manila envelope in her lap, the thick stack of papers feeling heavier than a coffin lid. Arthur had not just given her a parachute. He had given her the keys to his entire kingdom. The transfer documents clearly named her the sole executive of his global holdings, stripping him of all legitimate assets and leaving him with nothing but the manufactured guilt he was willing to shoulder for her survival. He was going to let the federal authorities tear him apart in the dark so she could live in the light. "Turn this aircraft around," Stella said. Her voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the engine noise. She looked up, her eyes locking with Marcus in the reflection of the reinforced window. "Turn it around, Marcus," she shouted, the raw, unyielding command in her tone surprising even herself. "Take me to the federal courthouse, right now." Marcus did not argue. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across the security chief's face as he tapped the pilot's shoulder and relayed the new coordinates. "You are the boss now, ma'am," Marcus said. Literally. On the sprawling marble steps of the federal courthouse, Rick Vane was delivering the performance of a lifetime. Surrounded by a sea of microphones and blinding camera flashes, he played the devastated ex-husband with nauseating perfection. He wiped a dry eye, speaking gravely about the tragic manipulation of his former wife by a scarred, dangerous underworld figure. A team of federal agents stood just behind him, waiting to execute the massive raid on Arthur's estate based on the forged ledgers Rick had provided. "He is a monster who uses his wealth to cage vulnerable women," Rick was saying, his voice echoing across the plaza. "I only hope the authorities can reach Stella before he silences her for good. I am turning over every piece of evidence I have to ensure this criminal rots in a federal cell." The sound of heavy rotors suddenly drowned out his final words. The crowd murmured in confusion as a sleek black helicopter bearing no insignia descended rapidly, landing with military precision on the blocked-off street adjacent to the plaza. The blinding spotlights of the news crews swung toward the aircraft, just as the side door slid open. Stella stepped out into the freezing night air. She did not look like a hostage, and she certainly did not look like a victim. Draped in Arthur's heavy cashmere coat, She walked toward the steps with a terrifying, measured grace. Marcus and 3 other heavily armed security personnel flanked her, parting the sea of stunned reporters like a blade through water. Rick's perfectly rehearsed expression shattered. He took a stumbling step backward, his face draining of color as Stella ascended the marble stairs, stopping just inches from the microphones. "I am not a hostage, Rick," Stella said, her voice ringing out clear and piercing in the sudden, breathless silence of the plaza. "And you are not a hero. You are a desperate, bankrupt fraud who just committed federal perjury on live television." Rick let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, looking back at the federal agents. "She is traumatized. He is forcing her to do this. Arrest her. She is part of the embezzlement." Stella ignored him. She turned directly to the lead investigator, handing him the thick manila envelope Arthur had given her, along with a secondary flash drive she had pulled from her own pocket, the real ledgers they had spent 2 days compiling. "My name is Stella, and as of 1 hour ago, I am the sole owner and acting CEO of Vanguard Holdings, the entity that acquired Mr. Vane's failing company," she announced, her words sending a shockwave through the press corps. "The documents Mr. Vane provided you are clumsy forgeries. Inside that envelope, you will find the original, unaltered financial records of his corporation, proving he has been siphoning pension funds into offshore accounts for 5 years. You will also find the metadata proving he forged my signature using documents from our divorce proceedings." The federal agent took the envelope, his eyes darting from the official bank seals on Stella's documents to Rick's suddenly sweating face. "She is lying!" Rick screamed, his pristine facade completely disintegrating. His voice cracked in genuine panic. "She is a crazy, bitter woman protecting a deformed freak." The lead investigator didn't even look up from the papers. "Put your hands behind your back, Mr. Vane," the agent said coldly, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and lying to federal investigators." The cameras went wild. The flashes illuminated Rick's face as he was aggressively spun around and cuffed, his humiliating downfall broadcasted to millions. Stella did not stay to watch him cry. She turned her back on the wreckage of her past, the heavy cashmere coat sweeping behind her as she walked back to the helicopter. She had a husband waiting for her in the dark, and it was time to bring him home. The estate was suffocatingly quiet when she pushed open the heavy front doors. The security team had stood down under her orders. She found Arthur exactly where she had left him, sitting in the pitch-black study, staring blankly at the inactive monitors. He was waiting for the sirens. He was waiting for the end of his life. When the door clicked shut behind her, Arthur violently flinched, his massive frame going rigid. He slowly turned his head, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and profound, agonizing fear, when he saw her standing in the doorway. "I told you to leave," he rasped, his voice breaking completely. "I gave you everything. Why are you here? The authorities are currently booking Rick into a federal holding cell," Stella interrupted, walking slowly across the room. She did not turn on the lights. She did not need to. She stepped right into his personal space, stopping between his knees as he sat frozen in the leather chair. "You tried to play the martyr, Arthur," she whispered, reaching out to gently cup his face. Her thumbs traced the jagged silver scars he hated so much. "But you forgot that you married a woman who knows how to read a balance sheet. I gave them the real ledgers. I gave them the proof of his forgery. Rick is gone. He can never touch us again." Arthur stared at her, his chest heaving as the reality of her words crashed over him. "You came back," he breathed, lifting his shaking hands to hover over her waist, terrified to actually touch her. "You stood in front of the world and claimed me. You protected a monster." Stella leaned down, pressing her forehead against his. "You are not a monster, my love," she said, her voice thick with tears and undeniable fierce devotion. "You are my shield. You are my partner. And you are never, ever allowed to push me away again to fight my battles for me. We are equals now." For the first time in his life, Arthur did not pull away from the light. He wrapped his massive arms tightly around her, burying his scarred face in her neck as a raw, broken sob finally tore free from his chest. The phantom king of the shadows wept, mourning the lonely ghost he had been, and holding fiercely to the brilliant, courageous woman who had finally taught him how to live. True power was never about the money or the fear they could instill in others. It was about this, the unshakable, terrifying beauty of being completely known, scars and all, and being profoundly loved anyway. If this story of finding beauty in the shadows and courage in unexpected places touched your heart, consider supporting our channel by subscribing and sharing this video. We all have scars, but true love never runs from the dark. It simply brings a light of its own. Leave a comment below if you believe in the power of redemption, and join us next time for another tale of extraordinary love.